Mercedes-Benz would have burned to the ground in the 1800s without one woman, and that is if Karl Benz could have made his car without her, which at this point I highly doubt. Who was this mystery savior of the German automotive giant? Just the carpenter's daughter. In the spring of 1849, the Ringer family welcomed their third baby girl into the family, Cecilie Bertha Ringer. Born to a master builder and carpenter nestled in the German countryside, Bertha grew up with her 2 older sisters and 6 younger siblings. You see, back in these days, the artisan trades would have been the highest position on the social totem pole, and this would go double for Bertha's father, who was a carpenter in the Black Forest of Germany during its heyday. And as such, Bertha grew up very wealthy and very comfortable. Her father would have been in charge of a large workshop. You see, at the time, carpentry and building were the businesses with the highest number of employees. So Bertha grew up surrounded by people who turned simple materials into fascinating works of art, and this was something that sparked her interests. I can imagine little Bertha sneaking peeks into the workshop with the wonder glowing in her eyes, and just like that, she was hooked on the concept of creating. I mean, the same thing happened to me the first time I saw my dad paint a car. Now, the Ringer family placed a lot of value on education, and it's a really good thing they were wealthy because with 9 kids, private school gets expensive. Bertha was enrolled in a boarding school for her entire learning career, and with the spark of inspiration from what she saw in the workshop, she knew exactly what she wanted to do. Throughout her schooling, she excelled in anything relating to technology, innovation, and manufacturing, stoking the fires of passion and driving a thirst for knowledge that made her yearn for university. Unfortunately, however, this was Germany in the 1800s. Women made dinner and babies, and therefore the doors to higher education were firmly shut. With university off the table, she moved on to her only other option: settle down and get married. Cue Karl. Now, at the time that they met, Karl was broke, but he had big dreams of not being broke anymore. He loved technology and had a dream of building automobiles, but was short on the time, skills, and cash to make that happen. Kind of like that one friend with the project car that he's definitely going to finish. The two of them hit it off instantly, talking late into the night about new technologies and grand ideas, and very quickly fell in love. And even though they both found it easier to talk about these dreams than their own feelings, they still managed to get married in 1872, becoming Mr. and Mrs. Benz. Remember, however, that Karl was broke, and before the wedding, his business was falling apart at the seams, and would have gone under if Bertha hadn't have invested some of her own money. It sounds kind of like a red flag to me, but whatever. After the couple was married, they used the rest of the money that they had to start a new business together called Benz and C, a manufacturing company aimed at Karl's dream. Over the next few years, the company would experience multiple financial setbacks and would slowly lose most of the business assets in the process. Kind of a running theme here, foreshadowing. Honestly, I have to admire Bertha's determination to fixing the sinking ship of Karl, and the absolute faith she must have had in him to just keep pushing towards the goal. As it turns out, Karl and Bertha were a dangerous duo, because every idea takes 2 things. A visionary, someone who can see the end goal clearly and is driven by the grand idea itself, with a head miles up in the clouds. And a doer, a person whose feet are firmly planted on the ground, observing the situation and diligently working one step at a time to make it to the goal. A team without one or the other is doomed to fail, either never completing the project or just never starting it at all. Working together for 7 years, our duo here finally finished the first hurdle of their project. Ringing in the new year with a bit of a bang, Karl and Bertha celebrated the stroke of midnight with the first fire-up of the first ever two-stroke engine. With this victory, they moved into the next stage of the plan, making this rudimentary two-stroke engine do something. And yes, this was rudimentary. Over the next 20 years, the two-stroke engine would be reimagined all around the world before finally becoming the engine that we think of today. The manufacturing of the new engine helped to ease some of the financial burden that the company had been facing and also helped pave the way for the next step of the plan. And after 6 more years of designing and redesigning, Karl and Bertha finally managed to realize Karl's initial dream of creating the first ever horseless carriage. He was only 100 years late to that party, but close enough. What they had managed to make, however, was the first ever internal combustion driven horseless carriage. When it came time to register the patent, however, Karl registered as the sole owner. Because, again, German law forbade women to have credit for anything more than a sandwich. And so, Karl would go down in history as the father of the modern automobile, while Bertha would be lost to history. If that was where this story had ended, I probably wouldn't have made this video. You see, 6 months later, the Benz Patent Motorwagen released to the public in July of 1886, and there was one little problem. They didn't sell. And I'm not talking like they sold less than expected, or they didn't sell well. I mean, they sold exactly 0 in the first 2 years. Karl had forgotten one of the most crucial pieces of inventing a new product: marketing. You see, no one trusted this crazy contraption. It was noisy, unusual, and most importantly, untested. And just like that, the company was in a nosedive. The business that Karl and Bertha had built together was financially screwed. Bertha was at the end of her rope, watching her husband's dream, 16 years worth of work, and their entire finances go up in flames. She had argued with Karl time and time again to let her show off some of the car's capabilities, to drum up some business, to get even a single sale, but Karl forbid her from driving the car that she helped create. To make matters worse, the local authorities banned the contraption on public roads on a temporary basis while it was being discussed with other bureaucrats. Some of the historical accounts even go as far as to claim that the local authorities had stationed police outside of the warehouse property that the car was stored at to prevent it from leaving the property and therefore entering the public roads. Absolutely fed up and frustrated beyond belief about not being listened to, Bertha decided it was time to become the main character. In an act of complete defiance, she completed the trifecta, disobeying her husband, waving her middle finger at basically all law enforcement, and technically, I guess, becoming the first person to ever commit Grand Theft Auto. And given this is still Germany in the 1800s, I think that disobeying the husband one might actually be the worst. Although, I am really curious about this Grand Theft Auto thing and how many stars popped up if there's no other cop cars to chase. I don't know how that works. Bertha and her 2 accomplices, her teenage sons, set out early in the morning on August 5th, 1888. Inventing the trick of pushing the car down the driveway before turning on the engine they set off to go visit Bertha's mother. Now, the actual trip there could easily be turned into a movie with all the crazy breakdowns and innovations that had to occur just to keep the trip rolling. Things like using a hairpin to unclog a fuel line, using a garter to fix an electrical issue, devising an evaporative cooling system, inventing brake pads after stopping by a shoe cobbler to have leather nailed into the stopping blocks on the wheels, devising a way to re-gear the entire transmission after having to have her sons help push the car up a hill, and becoming the first person to buy benzene or Ligroin, the accounts there are a little unclear, from an apothecary in order to refuel. And after all of that, she made it over the hill and through the woods to grandmother's house, all in the same day, sending a telegram to her husband to let him know that they had made it there safely and probably triggering the craziest swirl of emotions he'd ever had. Karl was probably hit with a blend of rage, disbelief, and a massive amount of relief. In the end, Bertha ended up traveling over 60 miles in 12 hours, an unbelievable distance to have traveled in a single day, not only proving the capability of the car, but its utility. The Benz family began selling cars and the business flourished. The apothecary she stopped by on that day is still considered to be the first ever gas station, and Benz continued production up to and throughout the 1900s, slowly turning into the car company that we see on the roads today. And that's the story of the woman who would single-handedly save the dying fate of what would become Mercedes-Benz. Best phrased by Karl himself, saying, "Only one person remained with me in the small ship of life when it seemed destined to sink. That was my wife. Bravely and resolutely, she set the new sails of hope." Bertha Benz would pass away on May 5th in 1944, just 4 days before the college that her husband Karl had attended would posthumously award her the title of honorary senator, finishing out the dream that she had since childhood a little bit late. Thanks everybody for watching, and especially for making it all the way to the end of the video. If you're still seeing this part, like, wow, good on you. Don't forget to hit all the buttons down at the bottom. Just poke them all. Leave a comment if you'd like to have a story covered. I like to research random things, so just, tell me where to go. See you in the next one. Yeah, we just won't talk about what she was involved in those last few years of her life in Germany in the 40s.